for that reason, I never bought into the hype of Byju's. Or a lot of it also was pumped up by media, by paid and unpaid PR. Right? When you have such kind of money, it is not difficult to buy everybody basically to play your narrative, and the result being what it is today. Basically, it's a huge loss to the ecosystem. Actual money eroded of billions of dollars. The 22 billion valued company, and valuations, again, they're on paper, they shouldn't matter, but in this case they need to be observed. From 22 billion dollars to effectively zero, but it actually it's not zero, it's minus all these billions, hard 5-6 billions which came in. And there is not even one person out of all stakeholders, be it customers, investors, vendors, sponsors, who is happy with the results. So when you know there are so many unhappy people, definitely there was something wrong with the foundation. So you look at nature also. See, you cannot have a tree, a large tree, without solid roots, right? So if you try to uproot a tree and put it there, this is what they did with acquisitions, right? Just buying the trees and planting it in their own backyard.
Welcome to Set Talks. Today, I'm honored to have an incredible guest. He has been an entrepreneur, founder, and investor, the legend himself. It's my privilege to introduce Amit Gupta. With over 28 years of experience across multiple sectors and continents, Amit's journey is nothing short of extraordinary, spanning entrepreneurship, founding, investing, and advisory roles. Since 2014, Amit has been deeply involved in startup and venture ecosystem, capital ecosystem, scaling numerous ventures to remarkable heights and successfully guiding them through their exits. He's a graduate from University of London. Amit has worked across Western Europe, America, Africa, and Asia. He has been known as a critical analyst and all-round people version. At personal level, he's a spiritualist, a passionate traveler, writer, and reader. Currently, he's a director at Factoryal. In today's conversation, we will dive into Amit's remarkable journey, his approach to scaling a business, the art of transformation at global landscape. Whether you are a founder, an aspiring investor, or simply curious about how businesses scale and succeed, there's something for everyone. Let's get started. Welcome to Set Talks, Amit sir. How are you?
Thank you so much, Cedric, and I'm quite honored to be on Set Talks, and quite kind of you to say all those things about me, which I'm not worthy of. It's just that it comes with the experience of all these years, and thank you again. And I'm so looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure. All right, sir. I have some questions lined up for you. Are you ready?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Let's get started. Could you share your roles and responsibilities at Factoral?
So, Factorial, we are a boutique management consulting come advisory firm where we work with a very select few uh, growth stage companies. And I say companies, not necessarily startups, who have transcended the early ideation product market fit journey and now are on just on the verge of hyper growth. So that's where we come in and guide these companies across business functions. In terms of my role, so if there is a funnel in a company, I sit at the top of the funnel looking at all incoming requests that we have for clients to work with us. And then going forward, I guide them on their journeys along with my partners and team, and also very much involved in their funding strategy, right? So essentially, I mean, again, if there is a funnel, I sit right on top of
Hmm.
that funnel, filtering out the kind of people that we want to work with. We are very selective in terms of who we work with. We like stable, grounded founders, and subsequently their companies. And yeah, so that's what I do. I mean, it's very hard to define one particular role or
Correct.
responsibility. Um, but the entire gamut now, after all these years, almost 28, 29 years, essentially we serve as generalists guiding these companies on each and every business function that they have.
All right, sir. It's great to know about Factorial. Any plans, sir? Follow-up question, IPO or anything coming years? No.
For us, no. So
No.
we see, we remain invested in the
Hmm.
growth of our portfolio companies and the clients that we consult with. So while we are function like a startup ourselves, but we are not like any conventional company, and we are now having scaled up, exited various businesses amongst our partnership team at Factorial. We're quite happy to guide and help other companies scale up, and in that way, our growth is multifold rather than growing ourselves, which we are growing anyhow. But we are more invested in our clients' growth.
Sir, in a previous interview, you mentioned that founders are greedy, while profit maximization is often seen as ultimate goal of any business. Why do you think, sir, greed plays a role? Can you elaborate on your perspective?
No, so greed doesn't play a role or doesn't have to, but it has been now observed over the last 12, 15 years in the Indian startup ecosystem. There have been instances where founders have prioritized themselves more than their companies. I mean, in a way, it's right, but I believe greed. Maybe I said it in some context of failures or brash founders, but in a way, unless the company itself is doing very well, earning significant revenue and maximizing returns for all the stakeholders, I do not think personally and otherwise
Hmm.
also that founders need to get into maximizing, for themselves only, right? So there have been many specific instances at large, which are, of course, accentuated by the media also, where many of these founders have gone on to enrich themselves, right? Both with hard cash and their lifestyle, and trying to become larger than life figures, right? Whereas their companies don't do so well in the long run or even in the immediate short term, right? So I believe, yes, of course, the founders have a right to capitalize on the gains, but they should be legitimate gains coming from the company revenues or profits, right? What has happened is that they have been encashing their shares in secondary sales, raising from venture capitalists, and just basically enriching themselves, which doesn't set a good example for thousands of other founders, right? Ultimately, everyone has to benefit from a company, right? Especially when you raise outside venture capital. If it's your own business, you haven't raised even one penny, you're bootstrapped and continue to remain bootstrapped, then it's your prerogative. But as soon as you bring in external stakeholders into the company, you have a fiduciary responsibility towards everybody. So that's why I believe in, whenever I said it, and I do keep stating it quite often, uh, that founders should be more grounded and humble, at least in their initial, middle, growing years, right? And then there's no harm in capitalizing much later, right? There's all the time in the world if you are building a company with a long term vision. Right. Usually takes 10 years minimum. It could go up to 15 years. So founders need to be there for the long run and aware of the fact that ultimately the returns will accrue towards them, right? You look at the Flipkart founders when they exited by acquisition by Walmart,
Hmm.
they had a good payday, right? And similarly for many other companies, just 2 3 days back, Swiggy IPO'd, and there is the story of so many crorpatis having been made, which is a nice feeling. unlike some companies where only the founder is spoken about or only the founder has enriched themselves.
So you're saying, sir, initial level businesses has to focus on building, scaling up business for their growth.
Yeah, and
Initially.
scaling up sustainably, not only on the back of raising venture capital. Unfortunately, in the Indian ecosystem over the last 10, 15 years, that's how old our startup ecosystem is, maximum 15 years. But ideally, I would say from 2014 onwards is when the hyperactivity started happening across all sectors, especially commerce. And somehow a lot of founders took to this building their own personal brands, both by loud voices on social media and also by enriching themselves. So I mean, instead if they focused on, and we know the result, what's happened to these companies. There are countless examples of a housing.com with Rahul Yadav, or a Bharat Pay which got embroiled in the founder controversy. Of course, they're back on track now with the professional management, and so on and so forth, right? So instead of they focus on scaling up their ventures sustainably, it will be good for them in the long run and for everybody else who's involved in the company.
So you started startup when startup what doesn't exist in India. So the next question is: you accurately predicted the downfall of Byju's and Ola when the market was ahead with hype and high expectation. How did you see their decline, and what are the key
Yeah.
signs?
So yeah, Ola, I believe, still hasn't fallen down if we're talking about Ola Electric, but the trajectory doesn't seem to be promising. In terms of Baiju, see, we acting as advisors, consultants, having seen a lot of businesses, ran businesses even before startups existed. I personally come from a family background of business, and see, no matter what kind of a business it is, the fundamentals don't change. You need to have a very strong foundation in terms of how you scale, and this gets even more important when you are raising outside venture capital. We are of the firm belief, me personally also, that venture capital should be raised for growing your business, not for burning cash or for sustaining yourself. So in the case of Byju's, um, you know very early signs were there where they scaled up quite irresponsibly, acquiring every company to cut down on competition, and also their go to market strategy was a bit too aggressive in terms of all they cared about is acquiring customers and not retaining those customers. So ultimately it all boils down to what your customer service levels are while you're scaling, especially, and that magnitude. So this is a case study by Jews, by the way, and unfortunately a one-off case where everything went wrong, and from a very early stage. Now some people bought this hype that what is the problem if they're growing, they have so many backers, institutional, the best of funds in the world. But in those days itself, and I'm talking about 2019, 2018, and going forward, the COVID time, when they uh, tried to ramp up all their operations quite aggressively, right from their employees, the culture at employees, a very aggressive sales strategy that they adopted internally, externally. See, all that is okay for a small period of time, but you cannot sustain that activity unless you have a very solid product and have a very good impetus on your customers, right? So the customer base should be primary. Like we take the case of Amazon, they still function on a day one mentality where customer satisfaction is of prime importance to them, even after all these decades Amazon being there. And people again refer to it as a case study in what to do right in terms of customer experience and service. So for that reason, I never bought into the hype of Byju's. A lot of it also was pumped up by media, by paid and unpaid PR. Right, when you have such kind of money, it is not difficult to buy everybody basically to play your narrative, and the result being what it is today. Basically, it's a huge loss to the ecosystem. Actual money eroded of billions of dollars, the 22 billion valued company, and valuations again, they're on paper, they shouldn't matter. But in this case, they need to be observed. From $22 billion to effectively zero, but actually it's not zero, it's minus all these billions, hard 5-6 billions which came in. And there is not even one person out of all stakeholders, be it customers, investors, vendors, sponsors, who is happy with the results. So when you know there are so many unhappy people, definitely there was something wrong with the foundation. So you look at nature also. See, you cannot have a tree, a large tree, without solid roots, right? So if you try to uproot a tree and put it there, this is what they did with acquisitions, right? Just buying the trees and planting it in their own backyard, without the foundation and the roots, right? So they had no roots, no foundation. Ultimately, those trees will decay and they will die down, right? No matter how much money you keep pumping in, if there are no roots, this is what happens, right? Very unfortunate. By the way, I get a lot of people think I write a lot on LinkedIn. A lot of people think I derive some satisfaction or pleasure about by criticizing these companies, right? It's not, it's constructive criticism on not what not to do, right? Um, and
It's a harsh truth.
it's a harsh truth, right? It's a harsh truth. You don't need to patronize just because somebody built a $22 billion company.
Sir, I agree with you and connect with you because few years back, Nikhil Kamath also mentioned like there's a bubble in startup ecosystem. Not everywhere, but particularly they are raising IPOs. They are raising, as you mentioned, funding to burn cash.
Right.
So
Yeah, so that's not sustainable, right? These are short-term PR based tactics, and also, you see, abundance of money is never a good thing, right? It avoids a founder from being frugal. Now, if there is no capital or less capital, then the founders will deploy strategies to sustain themselves in a better fashion. But when there is too much of capital, you will keep burning it, right? So I think a lot of mistakes were made, and I'm glad that now we are at a point where mature decisions are being taken across the ecosystem.
So you witnessed both 2001 dot-com crash and 2008 Lehman Brothers collapse. From your perspective, what went wrong during this crisis, and what are there any lessons you would like to share in your
Yeah,
observations?
so both the both the events 2000, 2001, and 2008, while they sound similar, fundamentally they're very different. 2001 again was the result of a bubble. Uh, Too much startup activity, and for the first time in decades, everything was being concentrated in one area, which is .com, right? No matter what business people had, people just kept adding .com. And today, when we look back at it in hindsight, adding a .com did not make it a scalable venture, right? So when a lot of this hyperactivity happens concentrated in one area, there is bound to be a reality check which happened across the world, right? Um, and in 2008, of course, there are a lot of economic and macro reasons, and the capitalist US economy, which after the 2001 crisis, whenever they came out of it, uh, right, they tried to hyper grow by giving loans to people who did not have the ability to service those loans, right? So basically 0%, 1% loans were given to everybody. And again, too much hyperactivity in the hope that uh, earning power will also go up, employment will go up, and it's way too much of a bubble which was created. And see, when it's almost like a pyramid made of wooden blocks. So you take out one block and the entire thing can fall down, right? And there came a time where such things happen. Lehman Brothers was, of course, also a result of the same kind of activity. We also call it the housing bubble or the housing scam, subprime mortgage kind of activity which happened. But see, in a way, again, in hindsight, all these events will keep occurring every decade, every 10, 12 years. because as humans we are very speculative in nature, right? uh, that is why casinos exist, that is why lotteries exist in this world even today. We are speculative as humans, we like quick returns, we fall for the hype, knowing at the back of our mind that this is not a rational decision, right? But still, I mean, see, the human behavior transcends every rational activity. There are so many things which we know are not good for us personally in terms of our health, but we would still like to indulge in them, ignoring all rational advice, and which is okay, because if these things don't happen, how do people learn also? Eventually, uh, do we learn from it? No, we do not learn from it, right? Again, the human behavior comes into
It's
play.
keep on occurring
It will
some
keep
or
on
other.
occurring. Generations change. Now the new generation will be even more brash about it, that we know better, we can do things better. Now with technology, people think that decision making is easier, but speculative nature of humans, I don't think will ever change. Just the nature of it keeps changing, but fundamentally the same thing happens. But it's good that all this activity happens. There is some learning curve for a couple of years at least.
So you have helped scale ventures multifold and led them to successful exit as well. What's the most critical element in driving growth in today's competitive landscape? How do you approach business transformation, and what common challenges do companies face when they aim to transform?
So, see, there cannot be just one particular factor. Of course, having an eye on the detail is very important. Details of how the company is functioning on a day-to-day level, which the leadership or the founders have to keep an eye on. And but still, if I were to break down on one fundamental thing, it is unit economics, right? So you cannot be making a loss on every unit of product or service that you are selling. At the back of your mind, so all overhead charges and everything comes later, right? But still, you cannot be selling things fundamentally at a unit economic loss, right? If you have that figure in the hope, so what usually happens with the startup is they start acquiring customers at very deep discounts, often much below their own cost price also, in the hope that customers will stick on, and then we will rationalize our pricing or start charging them more. But now in today's hyper world where competition is bound to happen, right? You cannot buy customer loyalty. Customer loyalty has to be earned by value addition, value creation, right? So if price is your only point of sustaining yourselves, eventually how much can you keep buying? And there is a end to the cash that you can keep borrowing or asking from venture capitalists, like Byju's we just discussed. Eventually, the cash dried up, right? And they could not prolong. The challenges, see, so there are various phases to a company, which I believe it's a 0 to 1 phase, which is ideation, testing, iteration phase. And then there is a 1 to 5 phase where you go to market and you start selling, and you're still trying to find your product market fit. Product market fit is whether your product has found the right market and consistently. It's not a one time sale. And then you have a very challenging phase of called the 5 to 10 journey, where you've essentially found your product market fit, and now you need to grow internally and externally as a company. And this is the most crucial phase, because after that, if you are able to navigate or transcend this phase, will be the 10 to 100 hyper growth journey. Now many people, even though they are not ready, embark on this 10 to 100 journey, and that's where a lot of mistakes happen, again, as happened with a Byju's or a Bharat Pay or an Oyo or an Ola Cabs, or maybe even an Ola Electric now, right? And we've seen that globally in many companies. So the challenges that they face is how do they transcend from a single or a multi-founder led company, now if you're talking of startups, into a proper mature organizations. So a lot of systems processes have to be brought in, not only for the sake but functional systems and processes. The founders have to take a step back from day to day and start thinking about strategy for the future. Now, very often what happens is a founder or a team of, let's say, two, three founders, ideally, when they start businesses, it's almost like their child, it's their baby, right? And they find it very hard to let go, and they do everything. So a founder CEO, by the way, is not only a CEO by title, they do everything, right? uh, I have come across founders, seen founders, been a founder myself, where essentially sometimes you're cleaning your office also. You have to do everything because you don't have resources early. And as you start growing, you keep a check on most of the day-to-day happenings in your company. You interact with teams, the teams run to you for any little small nagging issue, and this continues. So now when the time comes to mature into an organization, founders find it very hard to let go. They think that no, this is my company, which it is. Of course, it will always remain your baby, your company, and they don't think too much about the future. All they think about is hiring more people and keep growing. Now this growth, ultimately it will start going haywire. So the challenges, I think, are fairly common, again, because I told you a business is a business no matter what you call it. You can call it a technology business, a startup fancy word, or whatever, right? So those foundations have to be put in, sometimes forcibly, and people who are able to do that are the ones who would be able to then embark on that 10 to 100 or whatever hyper growth journey, and scale sustainably, right? Also scaling for the sake looking at your competition or what the competition is doing. Maybe they have gone leaps and bounds ahead. I can take the example of Swiggy and Zomato, more or less the same kind of businesses, same companies, but if you look at it deeply, each of them very maturely has taken their own path. There has never been any bitter competition. They did not try to copy or outdo each other. That could have happened by each of them burning cash. And luckily, both of them got to IPO. One of them very recently, 3 4 days ago. And there is a very healthy competition. And they look at their company as an individual entity. They don't look at too much of what's happening in the market. They're only concerned about what's happening in their business, right? So there is not one way to success or to grow, right? It's what works for you best as long as you put the foundations in place.
So you've been a founder, investor, probably an angel investor as well. So how has your experience in the startup and VC ecosystem influenced your perspective on emerging tech and innovation? What advice do you have
See, so,
startups looking?
sure. So in my case, I mean, it's both a curse and an advantage also that prior to being a part of the startup industry,
Hmm.
or in 2014, which is almost 10 years ago, I had another 15 years prior to that running conventional businesses globally. My own, I started, I actually joined a family business, ran it, and then scaled it. In the late 90s, 2000s, where startups, venture capital didn't exist. So, of course, a lot of my fundamentals and foundation building comes from that experience. Why is it a curse? Because sometimes I do not look at the new style of doing business, right? I have the fundamental belief that a business is a business. How is it an advantage? Because as I told you, in that growing up phase, all these fundamentals come back. You might have grown with fancy digital marketing or technology tools which didn't exist in my time. In any case, I ran a conventional B2B business where not a lot of technology could have been implemented. So it's shaped in terms of what we do now, or what I do personally, in terms of the advice that I give out, both on offline, online media, and in person to investors also. And what has happened is, of course, we are a very young startup ecosystem, only 10, 15 years old at the maximum, right? Compared to China, which is very big in terms of volume, and the original ecosystem, which is Silicon Valley in the US, right? So a lot of mistakes have been made, a lot of copy paste ideas and ventures were planted here by VCs, thinking that we are a 1 billion TAM market, and what worked in the West or even in China is going to work in India also. Let's just copy paste, give them money, let them execute. But what they forgot is that India is a very different country compared to any other country in the world. We are not a homogeneous market. Culturally, each state is very different. China or the US essentially are one language, one country, more or less the same culture. Even the immigrants who come there somehow uh, get ingrained in that country, and that's how it should be. India, every state is like a country, right? We are much like a Europe, except that we are one, right? In Europe, what works in Germany will not work in France and will not work in Spain, and so on and so forth. Some commonalities are there. Tech bridges that gap, but essentially you have to look at local nuances. And now what has happened is, because of some mistakes and learnings, we are at a very good inflection point in the ecosystem where everybody knows what works, what doesn't work, right? So I, along with my partners, come, with that advantage that we've seen these cycles of, as I said, decades. Every decade will have a cycle. Now, if you know, last 2 3 years we've had this slowdown in funding, which is also
Correct.
referred to as funding winter, and a lot of people were worried when it started happening. Whereas I was of the belief that it's a good thing it has happened, right? Because unless you pause, see, when you're running a marathon, also you have to take some little pauses in between. Not that you stop running, but then you slow down, and that's how you will be able to complete the marathon. So that slowdown was essential to teach people the value of money, number one, because this was the funding winter. The accessibility to capital was much lesser. So yeah, I think essentially we are able to. I personally am able to advise a lot of these companies because of that background, right? And again, there is so much of learning. I keep myself engaged with a lot of early stage founders, some of which I mentor also, not for any commercial reasons, but just to, a lot of people don't understand, it's for my own learning also, right? And to see what is happening in the new generation, which is always full of ideas and uh, new styles of working. And then, of course, if we start to work with them professionally, or I take up mentorship, long term engagements, which is very rare, but some of them I do. Uh, it's also to tell them what not to do and how to do if they are willing to learn. Yeah.
So in your initial days, these things were not there. So information about businesses or internet
Yeah,
was
yeah, of course, internet. I mean, so 95, 96 is the time when I entered business, slowly, gradually. Then in the late 90s, internet was just coming in. So one had to really work hard offline in terms of gathering any market data, or even looking at, since we were B2B, trying to find clients. A lot of offline activity in terms of attending events, conferences, exhibitions. You had to literally travel to other countries, since we were in the export business, right? Unlike now, where at the touch of a button, right, you can just Google anything and everything you want. And now we also have artificial intelligence, where you're actually talking to a humanized version of a computer or a bot, right? So yeah, accessibility to information, accessibility to people, social media, right? Anybody and everybody is accessible to you, right? You just have to know how to contact, when to contact somebody. So a lot of things have changed, and again, the advantage is that we've seen all these cycles happening, right? And that's why we are able to do what we do.
so you have started startup in 90s when startup word was not found. I believe in dictionary. So what motivated to start your own, I mean your entrepreneurial journey, and what's the biggest hurdle in your early days?
I wouldn't call it a hurdle, but still there were challenges and more of a learning opportunity. So, as I told you, I mean, I belong to a multi generational business family. Even though getting into business was not was not pre-decided. Neither did my family want me to be in the business. They had left the choice to me. So it is by chance that helping a family member on a vacation from my management days, I happened to enter the business and happened to crack a large deal in 1999. A very large deal, even in today's terms, about $150,000. And I thought, wow, this is so easy. Let me just get into the business and start doing sales. And then I learned everything the hard way. Um, and so nothing comes easy, right? Nothing comes easy in life. One has to work towards it. Now I hear and I see a lot of people talking about the work life balance, hustle culture, no hustle culture debate. Ultimately, I think it's all talk. Nothing comes easy, and it's a very individual choice that you make early in your career on what you want to achieve, first for yourself and then for everybody else. So now, and there is no problem. I mean, when you're young in your 20s, 20, 25, that's the learning phase where you should actually be enjoying working hard. There's nothing much else to do in life at that point. And in today's generation, you have very minimal responsibilities because you have a family base for most people to fall back upon. Your parents have worked hard all their life and they provide for you at least cozy home and good food on your table. So you're not in the 60s, 70s, 80s where you have to work for the basics of your life. So I don't see any reason why people should be shirking from hard work, right? They should rather be enjoying it and then earning their time later in life, right? You have to earn your time. It will never be given to you. uh, as long as you're able to perform well and earn your time, you should do good in life, right? So a lot of learnings. I think each day is a learning. Talking to you, I'm learning so much from the questions itself.
So business doesn't it has to be. There's a price you have to pay. The sacrifice.
Absolutely, there's
Yeah.
always a price you have to pay, whether you're in business or you are in a job or something. There's not much of a difference fundamentally. And what is the price is the effort and the time that you spend in it, right? Now, people think that if you have your own business, you have it easy. Actually, it's doubly hard because you don't have a set salary that will come in your account every month. You have to work towards it and also be responsible for all the other people who work under you or with you in your company, right? Uh, so the responsibility is multifold. Similarly, when you're working in a job, uh, it's individual. If you want to take that responsibility of being part of your company's growth and think of yourself not just as an individual but part of a team, right? So responsibility is always there, but I would gravitate towards having your own business or your own startup. Of course, it's multifold. Definitely, you don't have the cushion or the comfort of, oh, if this doesn't work, I'll go and take another job. No, that doesn't happen. uh, you don't get a monthly check unless you work hard towards it.
So you don't choose entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship choose you.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, a lot of the
Sometimes,
times.
sir, it is destiny. Like it's God's plan. God's plan sometimes bigger than your plans. So yeah, that
Yeah.
brings to the next question, sir. Your experience in different sectors shaped your approach to business and transformation. What unique challenges do you see in scaling up startups across different sectors and regions?
So, of course, I mean, every sector, every industry is different, comes with its own nuances. But again, I'll come back and I'm being repetitive here. The fundamentals of the business of running a business don't change. They are very agnostic in terms of, let's say, your organization systems and processes. And even before all these things, right? Uh, Cash flow management, unit economics, having a healthy financial picture if you can, and so on and so forth. So no matter what business you are in, uh, right, those fundamentals remain the same. Having said that, of course, scaling up a consumer business is very tough in any environment because you actually don't get to speak to your consumers. And I'm talking of, like the fancy term today, D2C, or even a B2C business, right, where you're catering to a very large number of customers and consumers. Now, you don't have direct interaction. In today's time, your interaction is through digital media, or if you can afford it, is through conventional media, where you don't get instant feedback. So feedback loops are very restricted to, uh, if they don't buy, there was something wrong in your communication, your messaging, or the product did not appeal. And if they buy, that's when you get the feedback. Now, a very less percentage of people end up buying your service or your product, right? So scaling a consumer business and maintaining that growth level is, of course, more challenging, I believe, than a B2B business, where you have direct, in a business to business environment, right? You can have direct feedback and interactions with your customers, right? Nothing is easy again, but at least your uh, the potential to crack accounts and to do sales uh, is much more enhanced, because you get to interact with those customers on a, or decision makers on a one-to-one level, right? And your risks are somehow minimized. The feedback loops are uh, more or less instant, right? I mean, so if Cedric is a customer of mine running also another business, right, I can just call up Cedric that, why did you buy? Now, in a B2C business, right, or a D2C now, it's very hard to do that. You can, but then how many customers will you call? You have to take average weightage of the people buying or saying good things, bad things about you. So, and then of course, industry nuances come in. Let's say somebody decides to get into a FMCG business today, right? Competition comes into part. There are legacy companies across globally, no matter what FMCG thing, and that is where differentiation comes into play. A lot of generational behavioral patterns come into play. The new generation doesn't identify with um, old brands, right? So new generation wants new age brands. The messaging has to speak to them directly. A lot of people are not comfortable using a Colgate toothpaste
Right.
or a toothbrush. They want something very new because they saw
Something
their,
fancy they want. Yeah, right.
yeah, they saw their grandfather father using that, right? I mean, it's a general thing, right? So a lot of businesses, food industry for example, right, it's the toughest business to make money in, right? Food and beverage, right? People think that food could be easy, or the clothing industry. I mean, there are millions, if not more, of clothing brands globally, and every day new brands are launched. uh, Also, but when you crack those businesses, your scale can be much faster compared to a B2B business. So challenges remain. Some sectors are more challenging than the other, but as long as you have your fundamentals, you have the right team to execute, and also in today's time, I think the right set of advisors are very important to have, especially people who've seen it, done it, and all. And I'm not saying because I am an advisor or consultant now, but generally also people have the, should take the benefit of engaging such advisors informally, formally, as they deem fit.
As a passionate reader, a writer, as a spiritualist, and a critical analyst, how do these personal values shape your approach to leadership and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, see, everything is, ultimately we are a human, right? All facets of the human remain with us. Just because we start our working day at 9, 10 a.m. in the morning, the human in me will not change. That's my personal part. And it also stems from that whole work life balance thing, which is in the news almost daily, right? I mean, I am the same person in the morning and I will be the same person in the evening. So a lot of my belief system, uh, a lot of my actions will come from my personal belief system. I might not impose it on others, but at least me, myself, in my actions, in my thought process, a lot of it will be portrayed accordingly. And it is very different from everybody. See, a lot of people, not lot, but everybody goes through a lot of conditioning right from the time we are born till our present day existence. You have parental conditioning. Parents like to bring up their children, of course, in the best of ways possible, but it is biased in terms of what they feel. right? So the child grows up, starts discovering the world. They go into the education school system. They get influenced or conditioned by their peers, which continues for a number of years: school, college, university. Uh, then it goes into a workplace where you are influenced and conditioned by a lot of your teammates and your peers in the workspace. And then you have a larger societal conditioning. So all those things combined together form a very large part of your thought making, your thought process, your personality. And whatever little is left, that is your independent personality or character, right? So I believe one should continually keep shedding, or at least things which are not applicable of that conditioning, and start increasing your own independent thought belief systems, whatever they are, right? Now you mentioned about me being a spiritualist. uh, that is my fundamental personality, and how and when is the long story. So I am also a minimalist, by the way, apart from being a spiritualist. And I feel it shapes up a lot of what I do on a day to day basis. Again, coming back to the work life balance thing, it all stems from my fundamental spiritualism and minimalism, right? I don't differentiate between my work and life. I cannot differentiate. So it's more about being in harmony rather than trying to strike a balance. So if it is 7 p.m., 8 p.m. in the evening, I don't have a switch I can just switch off and say, now I will not think about
Hmm.
work or something else, and vice versa, right? That doesn't mean I'm struggling in any part of my life and so on and so forth, because my fundamentals are very clear to me, at least. And if others want to imbibe anything from this part, it's okay. They shouldn't follow what I do or others do blindly. And I say a lot of the time, not for people to suffer from authority biases, right? Just because somebody is an authority or apparently is famous in the media and now social media, doesn't mean everything that they say is right. It is right for them. Take out the good parts what are right for you, and see what serves you.
So whether it's Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, or you, so you people started early, probably in your teenage, I would say. So it is essential for someone who is like listening to this podcast and aspiring uh, to run a business. Start early. What's your thought process like? Is there any particular elements are involved?
Of course, see, number one is there is no substitute for hard work. Nothing is good. You think that you have everything coming easy today, you have so many options and all, but when you come down to reality and start doing things, there is nothing called being easy, right? No matter who you are or what you do, even if you're born with a golden spoon, silver spoon, a lot of people have this fallacy that, if I was born into a rich family, a family with influence, things would be easy. No, it's never easy, because then what happens is the expectations are even much higher, right? uh, I'll give you the example of Sachin Tendulkar's son,
Hmm.
right? Now
Right.
imagine he's Sachin Tendulkar's son, or even Sunil Gavaskar's son. Both of them turned up to be cricketers, either by default or by choice. I don't think their fathers forced them. But did they have it easy? No, they did not have it easy, because expectations from them, comparisons to their illustrious fathers, were even much higher. And eventually they could not perform. Yes, they did well in life, and I'm sure they're doing well even now in whatever they choose to do. So, hard work, number one. Number two, to have the right kind of advice around you, right? Now, you'll always have your parents who are your well wishers, you'll have friends and extended family, and so on and so forth. But your external uh, influence, right, shapes up what you end up doing. So my advice is not to get too influenced, not to get too hyped with what you read in the media. Only do things which apply to you and for your situation, and keep working. Also have long term goals. I think, again, when you're, see, 20, 21, when you pass out of college, or if you are 23, when you if you've done post graduation, right, you have to think that you have 5 7 years to set up your foundation, right? There is no rush to achieving things in the next 2 years, 3 years. uh, you should take risks. In India, culturally, we are very averse to taking risks, right? Because we also have this, like they say in Hindi, log kya kahenge,
Right,
right?
right, right.
अगर हम fail हो गए तो लोग क्या कहेंगे? So you're always very cautious on what to do, what not to do, and in that cautious approach is when you end up making mistakes rather than the opposite, right? Because you fall straight line paths that, but at least what I've seen now in the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years is we as a culture, as a society have also
Evolved.
matured in our thinking, right? Now they don't say कि डॉक्टर ही बनना है या इंजीनियर
Right,
ही
right.
बनना है. Now they parents give a lot of freedom and all, but do the people actually avail of that freedom or not is the question. So take a lot of risks, right? I'm currently soft mentoring a girl who's been a serial founder. She comes from one of the best universities in India, like the number one MBA college in India, uh, and yet both her startups have failed, right? And while she approached me, and while speaking to her, I had to put that point in that it doesn't matter. You haven't wasted your 7, 8 years of your life, or 5 years, I think. Uh, there is so much to do now because you have those learnings on what not to do, so you can get into companies, business, start up again when your circumstances allow you, right? So a prime example, as I gave you, of somebody who did take a lot of risks, but of course is now again apprehensive on what will happen, right? Eventually things will happen if you think long term, right?
So yeah, so you started business from scratch, like, and how do you identify when a business is right stage for transformation? You've been master, you've been
See,
expert in
see,
this.
I was actually, I wanted to write about it this morning prior to speaking to you. There are two ways to approach starting a business, right? I don't know which one is right or wrong. Either you can be a Steve Jobs and just create a product or a service and launch it without checking if people actually need it. You create that need. See, Steve Jobs created a lot of products in his life, or was instrumental in launching those products at least, where there was no benchmark, right? There was no benchmark before an iPhone. Yes, cell phones existed. There was no benchmark before an iMac or a MacBook came in. Uh, there was no big problem that he was solving except for convenience, right? And of course, what he felt good. Now, the other way of doing a business is do extensive research on the need. So the first could be a personal problem, and this is a very good. Actually, most of the startups which go on to scale rapidly are a result of somebody solving a personal pain point. If I give you the example of Uber, which many people have copied, including in our own country, right? Uber was something which the original founder Travis, he was in a conference at Paris. He was going for a conference, and he couldn't hail a cab or a taxi on the street, and he got late and probably missed that conference. So he thought, why not create a technology platform where people can order a cab from their smartphones at the click of a button? It was a personal pain point he was solving. Same for the Airbnb founders who had extra space in their apartments and they wanted to rent it out, right, to earn extra money, and so on and so forth. The same goes for Elon Musk when he started his first venture in the finance industry, right? So it's a personal pain point because then you identify that if this is a pain point for me, I cannot be the only one. And when you're solving for yourself, right, naturally you will create the best product. You will not create a product which you don't like yourself. So Steve Jobs also always created products which he would be happy to own and look at every day. That's why you have these beautiful Macintosh
iPhone.
products, right?
Right.
Apple products, because he was so proud of it. The other way, of course, a much longer way, is to look at market research, right? Look at market data on what there is a need of. I'll give you an example of, like, we as humans, right? We like to keep inventing, reinventing. Let's look at food, right? Over the last few decades, we've messed up the entire food supply chain or the
Right.
food chain itself, or food what we consume. And then came some people who thought, let us go back to the original, which is organics, right? So they had a lot of research, a lot of data that what is the current commercial industrial food doing to us, right? We have to go back to the basics. So, but they researched a lot. So, both ways, in fact, I prefer the first one where you're solving for yourself and extrapolate it to everybody liking it. And the second way is more research oriented, right? A lot of large corporations deploy the second way where so a large corporate wants to enter a new industry, they will do adequate research on the market need, market data, scalability, viability, and this and that. uh, to give the short answer for all this long thing I gave is, if you can find a combination of both things. So you have a problem to solve, but you should also be aware that the problem is not too far away in the future and there is a need. Talk to your immediate circle, right? And that is why people do things like an MVP, right, which is a minimal viable product, and then they do a POC, right, a proof of concept, and so on and so forth, right? So lots of ways. There is no single path to reach a mountain, as they say, right? You can take whatever path you feel and stick on that path. Then.
So, how do you ensure that a startup's growth aligns with its market positioning and customer expectations?
So there is actually no way to ensure that except for feedback loops. So ensure that you have a good feedback mechanism in place where you're constantly listening to your customer feedback, whether it is a B2B customer, and more important if it's a B2B, a B2C customer. In B2C, it becomes quite evident when your sales decline, right? Sales keep declining in many businesses. They shouldn't. So when your sales decline, you know there is something wrong somewhere. Either the new customers are not buying your product or service, or the old ones have, there is a high attrition rate of old ones leaving you. That is a feedback. So you have to go back to the drawing board, go back to first principles thinking, and you break it down. Why did this happen? So the most important part, of course, is to listen and align, and also not get into, see, a lot of people get into the sunk cost fallacy. Sunk cost fallacy means that I have been doing, or we as a company have been doing things like this for a long time. We have invested so much of money in it, and why should we change now? So they keep sticking with that same approach, which is not working, thinking it will work one day if they keep banging on that door which is not opening. Might work personally if you keep banging on a door, but when you're selling a product or a service, right, you have to go back to the drawing board and see what is it that did not work. Some problem in my communication, in my messaging, uh, in my approach to the market itself, right? I'll give you an example of a pizza. A pizza is a pizza is a pizza globally, right? How do people innovate? People innovate by the toppings and the base. Maybe they do it different. Every country, every culture has a localized version of a pizza.
So that's what, sir, you mentioned marketing plays a role.
Yes, marketing and effective marketing, and also product has or service has to keep innovating and move with the times. Unless you are a very high legacy brand, right? So we have this biscuit company, Parle-G in India, which has the same packaging, same biscuit from God knows how many decades. It works for them. They've built it, right? That doesn't mean it will work for everybody. Right? So product innovation and listening to customers, I think, is the most important part.
Sir, how do you handle financial health and cash flow in a growing startup?
Yeah, very important question actually. And a lot of people, if they are growing healthily, they have good sales, good numbers, don't pay attention till it's too late to this part of their business. And see, finance is not accounting, right? Accounting is something different, which is a general ledger keeping, bookkeeping, and you are aware of it. Now, finance strategy is holistically looking at your entire financial picture, historically, the present, and also have an eye on the future, quarter by quarter, or at least next 6 months. You should have a foresight and have contingency plans in place, that if this does not work out, this means something, right? Maybe you have a decline in your sales, maybe you need to invest in a new market, new product, new service. Can I do it? If not, uh, do I have contingency plans in place? And you always need to plan one step ahead. So there cannot be ad hoc things happening that, oh, next month I got X number of orders, and that is orders, or there's a high demand, and that's where I need to now start raising my finance and start calling people that please give me money, please. No. So when you have a holistic picture of your entire finance, right, going into the details of every little part, sitting with your finance team if you have one, sitting with your chartered accountants, or if you have a an outside financial advisor, uh, I think a healthy habit is to look at it in detail, in depth, at least once a week, right? And then strategize about it in a monthly meeting, go over it as per your quarterly annual plans. And a lot of people make mistakes here, especially those who are in the habit of raising venture capital. They think that once the money finishes, we'll raise more, and we'll keep raising more, and the sales will keep happening. No, it doesn't happen like that. You need to have a very robust financial system in place, and also keep all your team members involved in the finance function. So marketing has to be involved in finance to know where the money is going, what is the return on the spends on marketing. Sales has to be involved. Your HR has to be involved on how much money is being spent on your employees. Why is it being spent? Is it giving enough returns? And so on and so forth, right? Customer service also has to be involved in finance at times, right? So yeah, and a lot of people, that's where they start making the mistakes, where a founder or the CEO thinks only I should be looking at finance, and then starts making those mistakes and decisions.
So that's why you mentioned foundation of business is a core element.
Correct.
Yeah. So looking back, what's the best piece of leadership advice you have ever received? Stayed with you.
Yeah, very hard to pin down, but there's something again from my very early years, and in fact, the first sale that I mentioned earlier in this conversation, when I sold something to a great leader from the US who had thousands of stores. And during our first meeting itself, he told me that business is all about people, right? And I was very happy, and I said, yeah, yeah, right. He said, no, wait. So business is all about people and the relationship. Ultimately, we are all humans. You're always selling to a human, whether it is B2B or B2C. So you need to, in B2C, it's difficult to have a one-on-one relationship, but at least your messaging and communication should personify that relationship. So I think that human factor should never go missing in business. And in today's time, we talk about having a very high emotional quotient, having empathy. Uh, Probably last few decades, all these things were not thought about so much post the industrialization era globally, right? And now post COVID, all of these things have come back into focus, and for the right reasons, right? You need to be an empathetic leader. Put yourself in the shoes of your team while taking a lot of internal and external decisions, and think how would you feel if it happened to you, right? So the human element should always be there, and secondly, always have a long term view on things, both internally and externally.
What one lesson you have learned from a failed venture or business decision or any observation?
Well, there are always many lessons, but I think one lesson is that this is not the end of the world. You can, and failure is not to be seen as a failure in itself, right? Of course, businesses fail, but it should be seen more as a learning lesson, right? So I think the most important, and I'm not going into the details of what, why, of course, all that has to be analyzed before you start your next venture or take on more roles in your life. Um, as long as you are able to introspect and take away the learnings from that. right? The learnings are very important. Now, if you think there is nothing to learn, it was all circumstantial, you will again end up making the same mistake.
So, how do you stay so humble? You've been an expert. You have seen so many decades.
See, it's all part of the journey. It's not something that I do consciously. Maybe earlier in life, I did make a conscious effect not to be affected by
Mhm.
a lot of noise or success.
Because, sir, why I was asking this question before this podcast, one of the founder he said like Amit Gupta, this man knows it all, microeconomic. Whether you ask anything global economy, he knows it all. But best part about him, it's not about how deep he knows everything. It's about he is so humble. He's so down to earth. He has zero arrogance or ego.
It's good to hear that. A lot of people on social media think the opposite because I don't hesitate in calling a spade a spade. So yeah, it's good to hear that about myself. And again, it's not a conscious choice or anything. Maybe that's I don't know. Maybe that's just I am credit to possibly my parents who've instilled those values. And I think to add to that for everybody else is not to get swayed by the noise. There will always be success. There will be failure. Noise will always be there around you if you are able to internalize everything and stay calm. Maybe my little spiritual bent of mind also comes into play. But having said that, it doesn't mean that one is always docile and doesn't give it back when needed. But as long as you don't hurt anybody and do it in a polite fashion, it's okay.
How has your global experience influenced your entrepreneurial and investment strategies?
A lot of it actually is influenced by my global experience. I've grown up in several countries from a very young age. I've lived in several countries, including in Africa, by the way, in Nigeria, where I grew up, and then later up being educated in England, doing business with several countries in the export trade. So now, since we are a very young country, on just 75, what is it, 77 years, I believe now, right? And most other economies are old countries in Europe or the US itself, right? So they have gone through this curve of development much earlier than us, right? Decades earlier than us. And naturally, they've deployed a lot of practices, best practices also in terms of how responsibility and commitment comes into when you're working and all. So it shapes up a lot of things and to also look at the world outside us, right? Had I not been exposed to a lot of global happenings very early in my life, I wouldn't be able to think or dream big, right? And also advise about scaling to people that think outside your comfort zones, right? You might be running a startup in Kerala, Maharashtra, or a Karnataka and all, but the world is much larger and also the world is much more open than you think. You think everybody is closed to their own way of working. No, the world is very much open to learning and discovering about, you know, just new ideas, new initiatives. And of course, technology has played a huge role in bridging the globalization gap. Now, today, if you and me open a website, we are not restricted by geography in terms of who will see that website, right? And
Right.
if you have this advantage of knowing certain nuances about that culture or that country, um, you know, you can deploy those in execution also. So, a lot of it, what I do, in fact, is shaped up by my global experiences where I think more than anything, the openness to new ideas comes in, right? We should not be closed in our mindset and our thinking.
So this question is straight from heart. Uh, you are very optimistic about India,
Yeah.
proud Indian. So what's your thought process, future opportunities in India across all industries?
Again, because of the fact that we are a young nation, 77 years old only, um, now, and also the highest population in the world. So naturally, a lot of growth will keep happening across stratas of society, across sectors. We still haven't reached a stage where the middle India, right? The middle India is a significant amount of our population. At least, let's say 60-70% should be the middle India. How will that happen is uh, when the lower strata of society, the lower population in terms of economics, starts going up into the middle, right? So there is no such other country which has this huge demographic of uh, a different population set and also the youngest population in the world. So I believe fundamentally our growth trajectory looks fine. All the macroeconomic factors are also coming into play. There is no dearth of good capital. Foreign investments will keep coming in. Our domestic consumption is going up, right? Uh, Maybe not at such a rapid pace again because we are a very large country. Now, what people compare it to America and the growth rate, you have to see that America is only 300 million people, right? We are 5 times the size in terms of population.
So you
So
are correct on that part. Like someone mentioned, इंडिया का चश्मा से देखना पड़ेगा. We are comparing
एग्जैक्टली सी अब इंडिया और इंडियंस को भी इंडिया के चश्मे से देखना पड़े. सो यू एंड मी सिटिंग यू आर sorry, you are sitting in Bombay, I'm sitting in Delhi NCR, right? Now we think that somebody sitting in a tier 3 tier 4 town Jabalpur, let's say for example, I don't even or deep in heartland of UP or Bihar, we think that person is not developed, they don't have aspirations, or वो बहुत backward होंगे, whoever that or that section of society. It is not so true. See, aspirationally they have the same aspirations, they probably could have the same mind, and it is actually the same as somebody sitting in London or New York will think of the entire country. अरे उनके पास तो कुछ है ही नहीं, वो तो पूरी country backward है, right? So we have to open up our way of thinking at looking at our own country, right? And that is where I believe next 10 years, 15 years and going forward, India will be the centerpiece of global economic growth, because a lot of things have to yet happen here, which have happened in the West. अब वहां कोई चीज हो गई. अब see, if there is the Mount Everest, once people have scaled that Mount Everest, they can't go anywhere else. We are still at the very lower part of scaling that Everest. So there is a big journey, and in that big journey, we will keep building the ladder and the steps and everything else around climbing that Mount Everest. And a lot of people will help us. We need support from everybody. We cannot be a closed economy also, right? Uh, and if in that process the whole world invests and then looks at returns also from India, there is no harm on it as long as it is not harming our own economy and interests.
So like you are very optimistic, and so Ramdev Agrawal sir, founder of Motilal, he also mentioned India में तो अभी आना बाकी है, like what you said, अभी तो opportunities आना बाकी है India में. We are the start of the beginning.
Yes.
So yeah, how do you view the balance between taking risks and practicing caution in business and investing?
So there is always a very thin line and very individual plus circumstantial, right? Now, financial risks again are circumstantial. If you don't have the money to speculate, whether in business or investing or wherever, right? I mean, how will you do it, right? So then you will naturally become cautious. अगर आपकी जेब में 10 रुपए है खर्च करने के लिए, तो आप naturally cautious होगे, right? And if you have thousands of rupees or money available to you, you will start taking some risks, some rational, some irrational. So there is a very thin line. Now, to take a balanced and holistic approach is feedback mechanism, right? Your internal feedback mechanism, where you take short risks, then see what is the result of taking those risks. If the result is not optimal, then you revise your strategy of whether being cautious or continue to take those risks. And at the same time, you take some long-term bets also. Not everything will be short-term rewarding. right? So, I mean, there is no fast rule or one size fits all approach to it. Very individual, very circumstantial, but you have to keep building. See, risk is something that you have to keep building by your gut feeling, right? I fundamentally believe in that gut feeling. We all have an insight uh, into how things will shape up. Sometimes we play by that insight and sometimes we don't, right? If you believe in it yourself, whatever that opportunity is, then definitely you should take that risk, right? If your circumstances allow you, and not many people are involved in the eventuality that your risk will not play out positively, right? So there is a 10% chance of succeeding at something, whether it is an investment or a business or something. Now you look at, if that 10% is not achieved, is it only me or is it a lot of people around me, my family, friends, my employees in a company, if I do have them, will be effective? And then you narrow that risk accordingly, right?
So, uh, for those who looking to enter the fields of entrepreneurship or venture capital, what are the top qualities they should cultivate? Any final thoughts for leaders navigating today's complex business environment?
Always have a long term view on things, medium to long term. Uh, Short term thinking, short term returns, uh, will not give you much in terms of scaling up. Uh, have a very good team, right? Invest in having the best team possible as per your circumstances, and similarly, a very good team of advisors also, right? In fact, I believe a leader's primary job going forward should be to finding and nurturing a good next level leadership team. Now, Steve Jobs, why Apple has done so well all through these years and continues to do well is because of Steve Jobs investing in certain people and getting them on board. Now we have Tim Cook, who's the CEO of Apple. Uh, he was personally brought in by Steve Jobs. A large part of his work profile consisted of choosing and then letting these people carry out their functions for which they were brought in, right? So, and the third part also is about having fun and letting other people have fun while you're a leader, right? See, ultimately, the number one goal of any human being is to be happy, right? So if you can facilitate that happiness on a very broad level, right? Now, definition of happiness could be different for different people. Somebody will be happy with money, somebody will be happy with given more titles, responsibility, somebody will be happy uh, having less work, right? And so forth. But if you can find a middle ground and cultivate the habit of making people happy, being happy yourself, that is a very underrated leadership trait, I feel. Right? Elon Musk is one person. Some people think he's crazy, but if you follow him and look at all his activities, he's always a very fun-loving guy. I mean, there are serious
Right, right.
businesses he's running now. Apparently, he's being involved in running the U.S. government also.
He's a
Uh,
true capitalist.
he's a true capitalist. Yeah, but he doesn't forget to have fun all the time, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, at personal level, he's very humble. Like
Yeah,
you also, you are very like.
yeah. I mean, yeah, yeah. I'm nobody to be compared to an Elon Musk
Yeah,
being a
I'm just saying
visionary.
this.
Yeah, yeah. But when you look at him, look at his videos and his pictures. I've seen him very fleetingly actually when I was in the US also at a distance at a conference, right?
Mhm.
His attitude is very humble and also very pleasing in terms of him being generally happy. There might be a million thoughts inside his head, given the amount of things he does, but outwardly he remains a very happy person. That shows how much he enjoys what he's doing. So, enjoyment in terms of what you're doing will radiate outside as happiness.
So, you've been a startup investor, uh, venture capitalist. So, so my question is, how startup investing is different from stock market investing?
Oh, it's very fundamentally very different. See, because when you invest in a, again, it comes down to the feedback loops and the market loops, right? In a live stock market, every day there is fluctuation happening, going up,
Right.
going down. A lot of sentiments come into play, a lot of emotions come into play on how markets react to a particular stock. Uh, See, essentially, at the very nature, it is speculation, right? You as an investor, as a venture capitalist or a angel investor, individual investor, can never ever be sure of the outcome, right? So if I
Right.
buy a stock of one particular company, I will have no guarantee that the stock will do exceedingly, because the outcome is not in my hands, right? Similarly, with startup investing, the outcome is in the hands of the people who are running the company, right? You might give them the best advice, you might get involved in getting updates on what's happening, you might even try to guide them, but ultimately you are not the one driving the car or riding the horse, right? So how is it different in stock market? A lot of feedback, a lot of occurrences happen almost live. With startups, uh, it's a very long term view on when you invest and when there can be significant returns, if there are, right? That if is a very big thing. Essentially, you are betting on the founder. And in stock markets, when does a company even come into public markets? When they are mature enough, right? So
Right.
there is a history to look at, right? There is a history of company. Now, Swiggy has IPO'd after almost 10 years. So there is a 10-year history to look at on how they have done things, by which you know how they will do things. Swiggy is example, all the companies, right? There is very rare company which will start operations and in a short period go IPO and be listed. No, there will be a history, right? But with startups, when you invest, you are actually investing in the future performance of that particular company. You don't have so much of historical data to look at, so you invest basically in the leadership and in the founder of that company. So both sides actually are speculative in nature, but of
Hmm.
course, the risks associated with investing in a startup are much, much higher, right? Also, given the rate of failure of startups, 95% of them globally fail, right? So you
That is
need
the
to have,
ratio of startups. Okay.
yeah, that is the ratio of startups which fail. Only 5 to 7% will actually go on and survive beyond 5 years. If they survive beyond 5 years, they will somehow.
Because such startup investing, it takes a lot of money, like ticket size. It could be
No,
crores.
it depends. I mean,
It depends upon the, yeah. But how do you like ensure that you have done the research and all? Because in stock, we have always
so
fundamental
yeah, yeah.
data
So
is there.
yeah, you have to, yeah. Again, so in a startup, you don't have fundamental data, but you have future data that you can look at. See, number one is the founders themselves. You have to
Hmm.
look at their ability, their execution, their communication. Number two, you look at the sector, right? And from the sector itself, you can see the viability of what's happening. Has it happened before? Even if it hasn't happened before, what is the conviction of the founders? How well are they at executing, right? What is the nature of the product or the service? Now, some are moonshots, which nobody knows whether those moonshots will eventually succeed or not. So there has to be a healthy mix between where you invest and what you invest in. There is no guarantee in investing in a startup, never ever, right? Because some founders, they might start very good initially, but down the line fatigue sets in, or they get bored with their startup and probably they are not executing on the same level as day one, which is not in an investor's hand also, right? Or a Baiju's kind of story where everything was perfect, there was a lot of money, they had large market share, almost monopoly, yet it didn't work out for a million reasons, right? So there is no guarantee that a startup will always succeed.
Founder is the core element. Like,
Yes, founder for the initial few years, founder and the founding team is the core element. So you have to bet on the company. And again, to your question on stock markets, Sometimes you don't even know who is the, at that point when they list
Correct.
in the market, you don't even know who is the founder or the leader
Right,
of the
right,
company. You are investing in a company with historical data.
right, right. So this is the last question. It's a quite different kind of question. Four people in a room. You are one of them. Rest three people are Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and Warren Buffett. So, what are the three questions you would asking to three people: Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and Warren Buffett?
Wow. See, all three of them were, then one of them, two of them are still alive, which is Warren Buffett and Elon Musk.
Right,
All three are different personalities, uh, but visionaries, right? All three of them are visionaries in their own sense. Warren Buffett, of course, you cannot term him as an innovator or a future thinker for humanity and things like that. But again, he's a visionary in terms of having long term view on all the companies he invests in or guides in. Right? Yeah. So my question to all of them actually would be, what drives you forward, right? Because these people achieved a lot of things at a very young age, right? In his 20s, Steve Jobs was a billionaire and then going forward a multimillionaire and a billionaire at some point. Same with Elon Musk. This morning itself, I was reading about his history starting in 1996, living in a one room apartment and then scaling up a company with his brother and selling it, which became PayPal later. So they achieved, and same with Warren Buffett, by the way. I've read that in his, even before he was 20, he was making a good amount of money, right?
right.
So once they achieved that goal of having made money, what is it that drove them forward to keep going forward? Money, of course, was not the motivation, right? Because for them, ultimately, it becomes a number, right, on a screen now. Uh, so, what keeps them going ahead would be my question, and why, right? Why only them? Why do they choose themselves to lead a large part of business? And
Right.
see, if we look at Elon Musk, he always talks about humanity and the human race and taking the human race outside to space, right? Why? What is the motivation level? For everybody, it is personal, but for people to do it at such a scale consistently over so many years uh, is something else. So there is something which is driving them. What is that thing? I'm yet to discover.
Thank you so much, Amit sir, for taking out your time. It means a lot.
It's
You've
been a
been busy.
pleasure, Cedric. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we had a very engaging conversation. Again, pleasure, and much thanks to you for arranging this conversation.
So
Thank you.
it's a wrap up, and that brings us to the end of an inspiring episode of Set Talks. A huge thank to Amit Gupta for sharing his incredible journey and wisdom with us, from driving growth and transformation to building and navigating the venture capital space. Amit's insights today have been truly masterclass in business and leadership. I hope this conversation has provided valuable takeaways for everyone, whether you are building a startup, investing, or simply eager to learn about businesses or about the secret of successful business transformation. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is the greatest and most highly anticipated episode of Set Talks. Thank you again, Amit sir. Until the next time, keep pushing boundaries and pursuing growth.
Thank you, Cedric.
Thank
Pleasure
you so
again.
much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.